Well, welcome everyone. I'm Alexander Lambsdorff, Vice President of the Parliament, and I'm happy to have you all here. It's a very well attended meeting, I have to say. Let me just say one word about sort of the logistical aspects that I've just been informed about. Rather than being fed in the body now, you will be fed in the mind, but sandwiches will arrive at 2 o'clock. So you need not worry, you will not starve. After the session is over, you will get a few sandwiches. The lunch has been postponed. So, this is a roundtable meeting that is named after Lord Ralph Dahrendorf. Those of you who follow European history a little bit may have heard about him. He was a very influential sociologist, a member of both the German Parliament and later the British House of Lords, because he was a wanderer between Germany and Britain, and he was one of the most influential liberals in the second half of the 20th century. He was also a European Commissioner, which is why the European Liberal Forum thought it particularly apt to name this roundtable series after him. Today we see turmoil in our neighborhood. And it's people like the ones on the panel today that are making the difference in those countries, advancing freedom, tolerance, democracy, and human rights. We, our side from the European Union, are also trying very hard to support these activists in their fight for democracy in their countries. I am very much looking forward to the discussion we are about to have, but now I pass on to Roel Martens from the European Liberal Forum for a few words of welcome.
Well, dear friends, dear Liberal friends and honored guests and speakers, a warm welcome also from the European Liberal Forum, ELF. My name is Roel Martens. I am a member of the board of the European Liberal Forum, and together with the European Endowment for Democracy, ELF is today organizing this roundtable. And maybe I should point out that Alexander is not only Vice President of the Parliament, also member of the board of the European Endowment for Democracy. I'm pleased with this event. How to provide support, how to provide effective support for democracy in the Middle East and North Africa. Is there a more important topic? Is there any issue that will have more impact on the fate of not only the Middle East and North Africa, but also the neighborhood of this region? That means Europe. Democratic development of the Middle East and North Africa can bring so much benefit for this region and for Europe. A non-democratic development may cause so much pain on all sides of the Mediterranean. I'm honored that European Liberal Forum is cooperating in this roundtable with the European Endowment for Democracy, but allow me to tell a few things about the European Liberal Forum, ELF, first. ELF is the foundation of the European Liberal Democrats, the ALDE party in this House of the European Parliament. We issue publications on liberalism and European policy issues. We provide a space for the liberal discussion on European politics. We offer training for liberal-minded citizens. We aim to promote active European citizenship. ELF is made up of currently about 40 European liberal think tanks, political foundations and institutes, almost from all EU member states. And these organizations are our members. And the diversity of our membership is providing us with a wealth of knowledge and a source of innovation and inspiration. On the basis of a subsidy of about €1 million from the European Parliament, we provide our members with opportunities to cooperate on European projects in Europe and also in EU neighborhood countries. So we organized for 2 years the Liberal European Arab Dialogue in Cairo. I think the question we will discuss today is tremendous and overwhelming. We need better strategies and better mechanisms to provide more effective support to civil society in the Middle East and North Africa. The European Endowment for Democracy supports democracy on a non-partisan basis. ELF is at the forefront to promote active citizenship. We try to get citizens involved with European and trans-European issues from a liberal perspective. I think it's great that together we put on the table this question about how to promote democracy, and how to support the unsupported. I think only through such cooperation we will be able to find answers to this crucial question. So welcome again, and I think I can now give back the word to Alexander.
Cool, thank you very much. I've been asked to make an introductory keynote to essentially tell you a little bit about what has happened, what the EU is doing, what we have been doing as the European Parliament, which I'll gladly do. And I think the most important question in that context is really what have we learned so far in this very interesting and challenging process? The quick answer is we've learned a lot. It's, from the perspective of the European Parliament, and for someone personally who's been involved in democracy support and foreign policy for many years now, I can safely say that no other single event in the past years has shaped European foreign policy in the field of democracy support, human rights, and so on, as much as the Arab Spring. We are all aware that this year, of course, the main focus is on Ukraine. But what we have done over the past years was inspired and caused by events happening in our southern neighborhood, in Syria and Egypt, in Libya and in Tunisia. So since 2011 we have reacted, we have adjusted our foreign policy instruments, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those, and then I will explain to you what we're doing in the framework of the European Endowment for Democracy, because as Will Martens just pointed out, I am a member of the board of that body. I'm also the chairman of its executive committee, and it's a very expression of some of the things that I'm going to tell you now. The instruments in European foreign policy that you may have heard of are the most important ones in our field are the European Instrument for Human Rights and Democracy, the Instrument for Stability and Peace, and the European Neighbourhood Instrument. For those of you who don't work in the institutions, instrument is a fancy word for pot of money. It means there's budgetary resources allocated to these instruments, and then criteria are developed on how this money can be spent, but essentially instrument means resources. The Instrument for Stability and Peace, as it was renamed now after the review, has doubled the funding for conflict prevention. This was a bit of a difficult discussion with the member states, governments who were skeptical about this. But the Instrument for Stability used to be a reaction instrument. It is now supposed to become a conflict prevention instrument. Therefore, it's been renamed Instrument for Stability and Peace to promote peace-building activities. We also have a new European Neighbourhood Instrument, and we want to be faster and integrate into our neighbourhood policies democracy support, democratic values, and human rights. So there is a preparedness here to give more to countries who do more in terms of democratic reform. The European Instrument for Human Rights and Democracy has been used also in the past to support civil society actors in Northern Africa, but also in the middle of the democratic uprisings. Over the last few years, we have gone the extra mile in the EU to mobilize funds in response to the new situation in transition countries, amidst, and I think that's quite remarkable, Europe's own economic and monetary crisis. We want a stronger voice for the Parliament in EADHR, as the instrument is known by its abbreviation, and we increased the human rights and democracy budget by about 1/5, 20%. We also ensure tailored support for human rights defenders in dangerous situations. That is something that is particularly important in this instrument. Also, there was a special emphasis on creating less cumbersome procedures for people who apply for support. And yet, potential beneficiaries still have to fill out dozens of pages, then wait several weeks if all goes really well, usually it's months, for a decision, and then a few more months before the first payment actually arrives in the bank account. That is not okay. That is simply not okay. Even after the reform, these instruments are still subject to all the limitations that are a reality under the financial regulation of the European Union. And democracy activists in countries that change rapidly, they don't have that time. They don't have that money in the bank account. They don't have the cash flow to generate or to be able to do their work without the support that they're supposed to give. So by its nature, because of these facts, EADHR, even EADHR, is more reactive than proactive. And in short, all the conventional instruments, despite the improvements, are not up to what we want to achieve. The mandates are too narrow, the decisions are taken by civil servants, they're usually risk averse, both in terms of political risk and in terms of financial risk. This is why the European Endowment for Democracy was created. This is precisely the reason, because it was an embarrassment to the European Union how slow we were. Just to give you one example, 2 election experts were supposed to be sent to Tunisia to talk to the National Election Commission there under the instrument for stability, the rapid reaction instrument, mind you. They were literally sitting in Vienna at the airport for 2 weeks until the last signature could be obtained. This is, as I said, not okay. So, we created the European Endowment for Democracy with the specific mandate to support the unsupported and to foster, not to export democracy, to foster democratic movements, to draw on the experience, also on the experiences of the transition countries inside the European Union, particularly Poland, the Baltic countries, the other Central and Eastern European countries. As I mentioned, the old instruments were too small, were too slow. So what we've done with the European Endowment for Democracy is we've created a hybrid instrument. Hybrid means that it is a private foundation under Belgian law. It is not an EU legal instrument. We operate at arm's length from the EU's institutions. We do not take instructions from the External Action Service, and sometimes the endowment does things that the EAS disagrees with, or the Commission, for that matter. It is an independent private foundation, but it is hybrid. So the financial support comes from the Commission and the EU member state. Still, it is not an agency or an instrument of the European Union in legal terms. What are the advantages? The decisions are taken much more rapidly. Sometimes we can take funding decisions within 48 hours. We have a protected communication system amongst the members of the Executive Committee that makes it possible for us to take these decisions very rapidly. Second difference from the traditional instruments, we are willing in the European Endowment for Democracy to, yes, support, for example, organizations that are not registered, or young organizations that don't have a proven track record. I mean, it's the nature of a transition that new organizations spring up. And they don't have a track record, administrative, financially, etc., which makes them ineligible for all the European instruments. We are prepared to take that risk. And then what I find the most important element about the European Endowment for Democracy and what we're doing with it is that in the Executive Committee, which consists of only 7 people, civil society has a veto. We have 7 members there. It takes 5 to take a decision, and the composition of the Executive Committee is 3 representatives of civil society, 2 representatives of the member states, currently Spain and Romania, the Executive Director of the EED, and 1 member of the European Parliament, which in this case would be me. Without the expertise from civil society, the decisions that we might take as parliamentarians or as civil servants would probably not be as good. These people from civil society know exactly how grant making is done. They are testing and probing into every single application very, very thoroughly, and therefore it is both a quick but also a highly qualified decision that I think has proven its worth. What is important to us that in all our activities with the Endowment for Democracy, we do not duplicate the work of the instrument. It should not be overlap. We want to complement the EIDHR and the Instrument for Stability and Peace. For example, sometimes we can launch processes, we can support organizations that are young and don't have a track record, and through our support they then create a track record and then become eligible for the instruments, which is also reasonable on the timeline. So these are the activities that the endowment is undertaking, focusing on civil society, focusing on movements, focusing also on individual activists. So we will also support persons sometimes, both materially with money, but also with expertise, with coaching, with just practical help. Now, for some of our partners, it is also a lot easier to accept support from a private foundation rather than from either a national government, so a foreign authority, or the European Union, which in some of our partner countries in the neighborhood is also seen as a kind of a government. Now, we of course know that the EED is not going to solve all the problems that we have, and we are still a very young organization, a little more than 1 year of funding activities now, but by European standards, and those of you who know Brussels a bit, realize that setting up such a body in less than a year, and then have 1 year of operations already, is light speed. We were really quick in setting this thing up because there was dedicated support from a particular, a number of member states. There was dedicated support here in the European Parliament, and therefore we could set it up in a rather quick manner. And I think that's the most important lesson really we have drawn from the Arab Spring in terms of the way we do things. The EED can become, perhaps in some cases already is, an important actor when it comes to fighting back against the shrinking of the space for civil society in many countries. Now, in the Eastern Partnership we operate in 6 countries, but in the Southern neighborhood it's 9 countries and territories that we're active in: Algeria, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, Palestine, Syria, and Tunisia. By the end of October, so end of last month, from the Southern neighborhood, although the EED had existed only 1 year, we had more than 600 requests from the Southern neighborhood. 600 requests for support, among them 30 from Syria, despite the really dire situation in that country, more than 100 from Tunisia, nearly 100 from Egypt. And one other, for those of you who know a little bit about grant making and all these support things, the size of our grants is very flexible. We have given out grants at, as little as 2,000 euros, but we've also gone up to 200,000 euros. One, in the grant making world, is a very small loan or grant, whereas 200,000 is already pretty significant. All in all, we have given out in this first year more than 6 million euros to pro-democracy groups. Let me talk a little bit about the 3 countries that we are discussing in depth today. In Syria, we have kept in close touch with Syrian pro-democracy groups and supported dialogue on key aspects of what we hope to be the country's transition to a peaceful future. We are not there yet, we all know that. We are operating out of other countries in Syria, obviously, but issues like constitutional reform, security sector reform, are discussions that must be had even though the situation in the country is still as bad as it is right now. We have also supported independent media to print and distribute in areas that are no longer under the government's control. In Tunisia, we funded a range of initiatives, and to give you an idea how diverse this can be, street theater has been supported. Women's rights campaigns, obviously, have been supported. Of course, in the media, we have also done things there to support a pluralistic media landscape. One of the projects actually is a satirical newspaper. And satire is always something that's pretty delicate. That's also something where the Commission or the EAS will be a bit hesitant, because satire can actually ruffle feathers and upset people, which is exactly what it's supposed to be doing. Having been the object of satire, I know what I'm talking about. But this kind of creativity and humor allows the people who make such a newspaper to transport messages about the importance of democracy and also the basic functioning of some democratic procedures, which is why we've done that as well. And then, of course, we have supported on a very short notice a coalition of civil society organizations prior to the elections 2014. As far as Egypt is concerned, we find that the situation there is worrying. The space for civil society is shrinking dramatically. This is making work harder for all the civil society groups that want to have open discussions about the future of the country. There was an ultimatum given by the Ministry of Social Solidarity to Egyptian non-state actors. They would have to register as NGOs under the very restrictive association law by the 10th of November, so by a few days ago, or they would face penalties including prison sentences. I should also say that there has been an amendment to the Egyptian Penal Code which brought the penalty for receiving funds from other countries, and this I found completely shocking, to a life sentence, life imprisonment. If you accept money from outside Egypt to become active in your country on its future, you are possibly faced with a life sentence for that. I hesitate to call it a crime. It is under the Egyptian Penal Code, but in a democracy this can of course not be a crime. Fortunately, November the 10th has come and gone. We're happy that so far there has not been a crackdown, but it doesn't mean we're not staying vigilant. We're also trying to get together donors, trying to help civil society organizations, discussing the best ways to keep on being engaged with them on the ground. This trend, shrinking space for civil society and democracy actors, is something that, of course, we're not seeing only in Egypt, but we've seen it for a long time in Belarus. We've seen it in a dramatic way over the last few months in Azerbaijan. We are seeing it in Russia, in a less dramatic way, but still in a worrying way as far as the freedom of the media is concerned. Turkey is a country that worries us as well. And it shows that the European Union must stay watchful. This is our immediate neighborhood. We must have a comprehensive concept in our foreign policy that includes democracy and human rights at all times. We must also focus on enhancing the role of civil society organizations when it comes to sustainability of democratic change. We must reinforce their capacities to promote democratic structures, supporting political processes beyond election day, beyond the immediate revolutionary and election situations. The EED was created to address these needs, to provide a helping hand for those who will not put up with oppression, lack of opportunities, and limitations to freedom. And we have seen a number of successes. I'm particularly encouraged by the elections in Tunisia. I think that has proved many wrong who said that democracy in an Islamic country cannot work. I think the Tunisian elections have proven otherwise. So there have been a number of successes. We are confident that we are doing the right thing. We are constantly in close contact with our beneficiaries to get their feedback on how we do our work in the EED, how the EU instruments are doing their work, what should be improved, what could get back better. I admit much of what this is about learning by doing, but we are still in a major historical situation. We're doing our best as Europeans to support the friends and partners and leaders in these countries in our neighborhood, and we will continue to do so. And let me conclude by saying that coming from Germany and having commemorated the fall of the wall here yesterday in the plenary, all of you who look at the opened Brandenburg Gate, you should take this as a symbol of hope. I grew up in West Germany. I did not expect ever to see the wall fall or the Brandenburg Gate be opened. So impossible things can happen. Very daring dreams can actually become a reality. And those who dream these dreams, they deserve our support, and that's what we did. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramsdorff. And well, as you mentioned, the environment is now a shrinking space for civil society and democracy activists. Now we will immediately give the floor to some of the people working in this very difficult environment. I will follow the order as is on the invitation, which is alphabetical. And that brings I'll introduce the speakers each very shortly. Give them 5 minutes to talk about their understanding of the situation. Then we open the floor immediately for questions from the audience if there are, and give the speakers the opportunity to give a concluding remark for about 5 minutes. If you wish to tweet about it, which is also part of our social media these days, is a #health-event. And well, the first speaker then is Mr. Abdallah. He is a board member of the Egyptian Commission for Rights and Freedoms, and has been a teaching assistant at the 6th of October University in Engineering, senior member of the 6th of April Youth Movement, where he established both Public Awareness and Training Office and Human Rights Office. Since 2011, he delivered training sessions on documentation and campaigning for human rights. He co-founded START Foundation for Development and Anti-Corruption in 2012, organized and participated in international conferences on the future of politics in Egypt following the 2011 revolution. and he participated as an invited speaker at the Brookings Institution, UNAOC Forum, and a PhD candidate now in the engineering, holding a master's degree from Ain Shams University. Very interesting to what you have to say. Please, Mr. Abdullah.
First, I would like to thank the European Liberal Forum and the European Endowment for Democracy for hosting this event. I would like to start by my message that I'm telling you by telling you what happened since the 30th of June and up to now. Of course, all of you heard about the Egyptian revolution in the January 25th, 2011. But now I'm speaking on the current situation nowadays. Actually, after the 3rd of June, there were 3 repression waves happening in Egypt. The first wave has started with cracking down on the Muslim Brotherhood on their sitting in Rabaa. About 1,000 people got killed in just less than 12 hours. Their corpse has been burned and thrown in the streets. And at that time, the Egyptian government said they have war against terrorism and that they are Islamists. And yet, in less than 3 months, they issued a law that is banning protests. And they had a crackdown on the liberal activists and secular activists. Ahmed Maher, the head of the April 6 Youth Movement, now served 3 years of prison. Ahmed Maher was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011. Also, Muhammad Adil, he was the speaker of the April 6 Movement, is now serving 3 years in prison, along with Maher and Doma, for just protesting. And also now secular activists like Ala Abdel Fattah and his sister Sana is now also in jail. They're waiting for their trial. Sana already took 3 years of jail. Yara Salam, she was an award-winning human rights activist working for the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights. She's now in jail. And then the third repression wave was against the civil society. It was the deadline mentioned here by the Minister of Social Solidarity about the 10th of November. And also there are amendments to the penal code. It just don't say that just receiving funds give you life sentence. It's funds, it's assets, and they assessment and any other things. And just proven by an email, even if it's true or it's fake. It's life sentence. And if you are a public official, then it's a death penalty. It's really now dangerous in Egypt. Yes, we have broken the wall of fear in the January 25th, 2011, but now the authorities are now rebuilding the wall of fear. Now we have cases that mom may be afraid and she tells the police to take her son, that he is joining the protest, he is pro-democracy. Now all the independent people who work at the media who are liberals are now fired from their position. Now Bassem Youssef is in his house, one of the major media people that are pro the Egyptian revolution and are pro-democracy. Now there are secret prisons in Egypt. Maybe you have seen the Guardian piece talking about the Al-Azuri prison, where people are tortured, and then they make fake prosecutions to them, so that when they come to the real prosecution, they just tell what the authorities want them to say in the prosecutions. And maybe you have heard the UPR on Egypt in the Human Rights Council, and seen all the notes that have been by countries about what's happening in Egypt. Now we have more than 40,000 people who are detained in prison. Some of them are really have really died out of the place of detention, which is not equipped for humans. Most of the human rights activists right now have went abroad. They're afraid of detention in Egypt. Hussam Bahgat is now abroad, who is the founder of the EIPR, one of the biggest human rights organizations. Now Gamal Eid is abroad already, and they are well-known human rights activists now. So the human rights defenders now are either in jail, or either abroad, or they are threatened by either being jailed, or some of them were threatened to be killed by the authorities. And now this is what we have reached after 4 years of the Egyptian revolution, who has inspired a lot of people. And now we have seen the activists that all the leaders here in Europe and in the US would like to meet them at that time, like Maher, like Adel, like Abdoma. They are now thrown in 2 meters by 2 meters cell, and no one actually asks about them. And this really hurts. We are here to ask you to continue your work to support the democracy, and hereby to call you to start a campaign in the memorial of the January 25th revolution, to tell those detainees, the liberal detainees, the secular detainees, that you are with them and they are not forgotten. Hopefully we can do that now, and hopefully that the EU will really support democracy in Egypt by all means. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Katoudas, Director of Study Forum for Greece and Corinth and organizer of the Arab-European Liberal Dialogue Forum. You have been deeply involved in politics throughout your career. Which you began at the Center for Political Research and Information, and you've held many prestigious posts in New Democracy, beginning as the head of New Democracy Strategic Coordination Center. You served as a senior advisor to New Democracy's leader, Konstantin Mitsotakis, and then senior advisor to the Prime Minister, chief speechwriter, lastly. And most notably, you were sworn in as a Secretary General for European Affairs at the Greek Foreign Ministry. You've been an avid writer throughout your career, writing on numerously scholarly journals, such as European Journal of Political Research, West European Politics, co-editing and co-authoring Political Change in Greece before and after the colonies, as well as being co-author of Broadcasting and Politics in Western Europe. Thank you very much, please.
This is not very convenient. Well, thank you very much for this presentation. I cannot use the word delighted for having co-organized with Friedrich Naumann Stiftung the 2 consecutive years of the Arab-Europe Symposia in Cairo. And I cannot say I'm delighted because, as the previous speaker very alarmingly said, several years after the Arab Spring broke out, the situation continues to be not just unsatisfactory, but in some cases tragic. And of course we have the descent into hell of Syria. On a personal level, I'm very depressed because I have been very active as Secretary General for European Affairs with the French and other administrations to bring about the Union for the Mediterranean. It was at that time that Greece had a set of 17 proposals which the French side accepted in their totality. And our idea was to bring the 2 shores of the Mediterranean closer. Our idea was to create synergies that would not be just theoretical, but would bring the societies on the 2 sides of the Mediterranean much closer in every way. For example, complementarity projects. A motorway in Tunisia facing a motorway in Italy so that the transfer of goods will be immediate. Railway systems. And Greece had also presented a whole set of ideas of how to connect the maritime coasts of the Mediterranean, north and south. It is not, I believe it's not only just my belief, but it's Greece's belief, because Greece was always open to the world as a country. It still has the largest merchant marine in the world. So the idea is that you cannot improve democracy unless you communicate with those who are already democracies. It is essential. When we had a junta in Greece, what has saved Greece was the support of Europeans that they didn't accept. The military rule as a normal phenomenon. Now, I was asked to say what were my conclusions from my contact with the Arab liberal intellectuals these 2 years. My conclusions are that there is much more human capital in the Arab world than Europeans think. It is important for Europeans to understand that there are lots of people in the Arab world who have liberal set of mind, who could, if united, indeed properly informed of how to act strategically, they can produce results. That's the first remark. And then vice versa, we from the Forum for Greece, we put forward 2 basic ideas to our Arab friends. The first basic idea, which I would like you to remember, is this: we do not consider any culture incapable of adopting liberal principles if historical circumstances are prone for these principles to be introduced. And in order to fortify this point and give an example, we have stated the case of Greece 2.5 centuries ago. Greece at that time was occupied by the Ottoman Turks. We were forcefully kept backward. We have been cut off from Western Europe. Not all of us, but there were strong Greek communities in every city in Europe, merchants, intellectuals, and so on. But what happened was this: around the middle of the 18th century, or around the 4th quarter of the 18th century, there was a group of intellectuals who were enlightened, very good, well-known names in Greece now, which managed to penetrate that Ottoman province with liberal ideas. And the Greek Revolution was nothing else but the outbreak of a whole nation because it was informed of these liberal ideas. And this is a very good lesson for our Arab friends across the sea. And there was a lot of interest by many, and even some people from Syria, I don't remember the names now, and some people from Egypt. They wanted us to hold a seminar and tell them how this historical process was followed. And not only was it successful in Greece, but think of it, in almost 200 years of independence, Greece had only had 11 years of authoritarian rule. It is a tremendous success for a former part of the Ottoman Empire. Why not the Arabs? And the second thing, and this is a sad conclusion, is that in the Arab world there is the following mistake. I'll tell you what. This is what the Greek side, Professor Hadzis, Professor Kouliaras, who are very well-known intellectuals, which were brought over to Cairo by the Forum, they concluded that the problem is this. When you talk of liberal democracy, you have to remember there are 2 principles. The principle of majority and the principle of liberalism. The principle of majority is that, well, if you win elections, you rule the country. What the Arab world is in difficulty of understanding, particularly all these people who now lead dictatorships again, is democracy is never complete without the second principle as well, the liberal principle. And that means that even if a majority wishes to carry out a project infringing on basic rights of the citizens, it should not do that. And this is the difficult point in the Arab world. They don't understand, not all the Arabs of course, but the governments in the Arab world tend to ignore the second principle. Look at Morsi. He got a large majority, he became the government, but then immediately he forgot that he had to abide by certain principles in exercising this government. This is the important thing. And I will conclude by saying, this first stage, by saying that there has been a tremendous effort at the Council of Europe for putting forward proposals of getting out of the crisis, particularly in Syria. But it is 2 things we must do, and I will come to it later when the round table comes back to me. First, a concrete strategy of getting out of Syria. of the situation in Syria, of which I have 6 proposals, which have been already adopted at the Council of Europe by MPs whom I have helped to pile up these proposals. And the second is a revival of the Mediterranean Union under the light of the developments of the Arab Spring and subsequent developments. We cannot allow all this work of rapprochement that was carried out for so many years to bring the two sides together to completely collapse and nothing come out of it. But I will come back to it when the moment comes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. After a painful introduction of the situation in Egypt, we had a careful message of hope. And now we're going back to the Middle East. Mr. Sarkis is a Syrian pro-democracy, or the son of Syrian pro-democracy dissidents, and chairperson of the Association de Soutien aux Médias Libres. Raised and educated in France, you had your PhD in human genetics in Paris. Shortly joined the Brain Science Institute, RIKEN, in Tokyo. Obtained a permanent position as a researcher at CNRS in France. In the field of genetic engineering, collaborated with the European Commission as experts on ethic panels, and coordinated the INTEGRA, the European Consortium for Development of the Genetic Engineering Tools and their application. In 2010, you started entrepreneurial activities, creating a first biotech company. 2011, shortly after the start of the uprising in Syria, you spotted and founded the Association for the Support of Free Media, a Franco-Syrian association committed to participate in the growth of civil society, contributing to the revival of the Syrian media landscape. Projects supported by ASML are implemented inside the Syrian territories by SMART, the Syrian Media Action Revolution Team, one of the most active and efficient civil action groups in Syria. Mr. Sarkis is a co-founder of SMART. Please, thank you very much.
So, first of all, thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk about Syria, which is a country where we have a very sad situation and complex situation. To talk about the civil society in Syria, we were thinking, as people coming from a dissident side, that there is no more civil society in Syria before 2011. It had been 40 years that we had dictatorship in that country, and there were there were some initiatives, but very few civil society initiatives coming mainly from some intellectual, old dissidents, politicians, but the young people were raised in a country of corruption and dictatorship. We were very surprised by the uprising in 2011. But what was more surprising to us is the total lack of support of this civil society movement in 2011, where it was still a peaceful movement, a non-violent movement led by young people. And that was actually a big shock. I was going to all the official European donors and others, and we had only negative responses. Till 2013, our only support was from Syrian diaspora. We never received any support from international donors, and we had from, without giving name, but high representative of the people involved in the Syrian politics, responses as, we will never help you directly, we will work only with international organizations for not their job. That was the kind of response we were having till 2013. So that was a major issue. When you are part of the civil society, you cannot get help from the international donors before the situation goes very bad, before there are Islamists, jihadists, things that interest most of the people then, and then they start willing to helping you, but it's a bit too late. The help should be, and I think that's something we should learn for the future. The help should come very early to the civil society before things goes wrong. That's the first point. Then there are other criticisms I would like to say about not only the international donors, but the international organizations that work in Syria particularly. They were working on a field that they didn't know. They didn't know who were the real activists, who were the people who were just doing corruption work. They helped wrong people, and they did projects that were completely nonsense projects. As a worker for media development, I went to see the media development organizations, the international ones, and I said, we want to print and distribute magazines in Syria. And all of them, without any exception, responded, oh no, we only promote internet projects. Yes, in Syria, not only we don't have internet, we don't have electricity in most of the areas where you have the revolution going on. So that was like really nonsense answers to the needs. People don't know the needs, don't even want to understand the need. There is this, as Syrian, I had this feeling of like almost racism from some organizations. Like, you don't understand anything to the civil society, you don't understand democracy, don't try to work in democracy. As a Syrian NGO trying to help independence or trying to promote independence of media and freedom of media in Syria, we had the normal answer was how Syrians can help Syrian media. This is a conflict of interest. You will not allow them to be independent. Let the European NGOs work on the independence of Syrian media. That's again one of the problems we have with these international NGOs. So that's one point. The other point, of course, is the inefficacy of these international organizations working in Syria. I think it has been demonstrated by many reports now. And another less known criticism is that they introduced corruption in the civil society organization. Of course, they have plenty of money as compared to Syrian civil society NGOs. You should imagine what it can, the impact of paying someone inside Syria $3,000 a month. That's what some NGOs are doing. They are using the young activist inside Syria and giving him $3,000 a month for someone who is 19 or 20 years old. In Syria, actually people who have some money get between $100 $150. A soldier or a rebel fighter gets between $50 and $70 a month. How would you want that these fighters who came from the popular rebellion would help the civil society workers if they receive 20, 50 times less money than the people they should support? This is really corruption of the people, and this is a very important point. If you want to help in Syria, you have to work with Syrians, and you have to do it the Syrian way. Don't try to do it the international way. Don't mess up with the very few people still able to work inside Syria. Help them through these Syrian NGOs that are quite well known now. There are very few still working inside Syria. Of course, there is another type of work. It's also with the people in the camps in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Jordan. Again, there are a lot of relief projects, very few projects for civil society, pro-democracy project or education of people. To conclude my talk, and it's a very pessimistic talk maybe, there are people much smarter than us. It's the Islamic State, the jihadists, who are working very actively, very efficiently in Syria on the civil society to annihilate it, to educate and raise young people from 3 years age, starting from 3 years age, that are already educating them into the mind of jihadism. The schools in Syria are led by the Islamists. The media are led by the Islamists. The women projects are led by the Islamists. Any civil society project is led by Islamists in Syria. There are very few projects that are still working that are not led by Islamists, and I would say that we are all responsible of that, and it's time to try to do something else.
Thank you very much for your insights. Yeah, they're too late to help the wrong person. We go from here to Mr. Scheltens. You've been active for a long time for the Institute for Multi-Party Democracy, responsible in 2011-12 for founding the current Tunisia program, consisting of a school of politics, which mixed political party youth, civil society participants. You were a steering committee member of the EIDHR-funded Studel Consortium on electoral and dialogue support program in Libya in 2013. Involved in the EIDHR-funded Inspired program on developing an operational model for inclusive multi-stakeholder policy dialogue, which was piloted in 5 countries, including Tunisia and Morocco. At the Institute for Multi-Party Democracy, you are currently also involved in methodology and knowledge development programs. And previously, you worked for the Dutch organization Pro Demos, House for Democracy, Rule of Law, specialized in public participation in politics, and also in your studies already, you studied political science at the University of Amsterdam. Please.
Thank you very much for that elaborate introduction. I work indeed for the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy, which is an organization that uses the slogan by parties, for parties. We were founded by 7 of the then 9 political parties in the Dutch parliament, amongst 2 liberal parties who are also active in the European Parliament. So in that sense, we are here at a session that was organized by 2 of our 7 founding fathers. So first of all, thank you for that invitation. NID, however, itself works non-partisan and neutral. What we try to do is promote dialogue between political parties and do capacity strengthening for political parties. However, if we talk about the examples of the lack of liberalism that we've seen from the examples by our 2 other speakers, then it's not very difficult to, even from a non-partisan or neutral position, to very much defend liberal principles, because we live here in Europe in what we call liberal democracies anyway. It may surprise you that I am here. I think it's best that my last name starts with an S and that I was just the last speaker to talk about political parties, because we're talking more about civil society. But what I think is very important to realize is that we often make the mistake of not considering political parties to be civic entities. Political parties are just like associations. They are effectively associations. They, however, have citizens that become a member that have a very specific desire, and that is to nominate and candidate themselves to hold government power, to work and take responsibility to prove or develop one's country. Now, of course, we are not naive at NIMD, and we know that there are a lot of political parties around the globe who are effectively not appreciated, hated, considered corrupt, ineffective, amateuristic. But it's actually one of those dilemmas or paradoxes that have made NIMD to be found. Like, if you are not going to consider political parties as non-state actors, if you're not going to consider them as civil society initiated organizations, then you're going to have very, very, very weak governments at a later stage. And this is what we see in a lot of countries where we work, where actually the paradox is there's often quite considerable funding for civil society, who then becomes quite capacitated and professionalized, and then has a very professional approach to be very demanding to the government, which is an incredibly weak institution. And so in that sense, the plea from NIMD is, please realize that if you want political leaders to be of quality,
they usually start somewhere in civil society, and they too need to be brought up to a certain level by being influenced, by being capacitated. Otherwise, you can continue with democracy with very cynical remarks saying in a democracy, people get the leaders they deserve. Which is meant very cynically that you get leaders that are just not up to the task because they've been selected for the wrong reasons, also by citizens. What I think is very important then to move to civil society is that there are the true human rights defenders. There are the individuals that really go onto the streets and fight. And I think there, Mr. Lamsdorff have mentioned both from the EED as well as from other European instruments, the possibilities for support there. But what I think is very important also is that we look at civil society and helping them have a voice, but also helping them being listened to. We've seen a lot of civil society support that was focused on voicing, making civil society organizations voice, but if you then still have a government that is totally dumb and blind to those remarks, then you're not going to get very far. So what NIMG does in most of our work is actually trying to create dialogue platforms. Either dialogue platforms between political parties so that they understand they are both competitors, but they're also colleagues. They're not enemies. And we try to increasingly work on, let's say, policy dialogue platforms where we get governments, political party, parliamentarians, and civil society actors, both around the table, all around the table, to come to developments of policies that actually deliver the desires that citizens have. So in that sense, I think I was very happy to see in the folder that was just distributed also around the European Endowment, it does include support to political parties and political actors, because as I said, that's not uncontroversial if you look at political parties in a certain way. So I think compliments there for including that in let's say, the portfolio of type of activities. If I would go to very concrete examples of what we do, indeed in Tunisia we've started a school of politics, and in many other countries we have democracy schools. And this is really where you have political party representatives, often youth members, sent by their party, mixed with civil society actors and potential civil society leaders, to jointly work on developing views or horizons for the development of their country. And next to the very substantive level, it is very much about trust building, about building personal relations, about building a link between civil society and political society, because that is one of the problems, that's how separated they actually are. We've done so in Tunisia with this example of the school. We have two schools on a local level in Egypt, but we very much recognize the difficulties of working in those countries, as you've mentioned. We so far have a construction that, let's say, safeguards us from government intervention, but it is exactly this problem in that country that I can't elaborate about more than that at this stage what that construction is. And in Tunisia and Morocco, what we've done Inspire. This is really about creating policy dialogue between civil society and governments and parties. If I would very concretely have to go, so what can we do to support the unsupported? Dialogue settings, which works on a number of levels, policy dialogues between civil society and governments and politics. But one thing that was also very exciting, which I wanted to share because we're here in a European setting, is that what the Tunisians in our projects really liked was that we did our effort in a combination of Dutch and Finnish organizations together with Bulgarians. Because I think I really like the remark by our partner from Greece, you need to understand majority and liberalism. And they look at the Netherlands, they look at Finland, and they see, well, that might be the stage we want to end up in. However, we have our own context, and plus, what are we going to be working on next 20 years is the route to get there. So what did they see? They saw the Netherlands and Finland as, let's say, examples or experiences, but the very practical information, how do you go from authoritarian regime to an actual democracy, transitional experience, is of course what the Netherlands and Finland really don't have, or have it from so long ago that we can't, sincerely speak on that. And that's where the Bulgarians came in. Of course, the Finnish and the Dutch had the money, and the Bulgarians supported us in let's say, non-financial manners. But that dynamic worked very much. And if we are looking at European instruments and European efforts with our neighbors, and it's very good to distinguish the different qualities that we have in Europe. And that is, let's say, the established experiences and the transitional experiences. And if in our efforts in Tunisia, but also in other countries, we can combine that. The Ottoman Empire was mentioned. Bulgaria did specifically because they feel historically they have actually ties with the Arab world, having been part of the Ottoman Empire. There will be more examples like that. I was this morning at a session where former Serbian President Boris Tadic was present, and also there you see these different experiences that might be a very good offer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for also contrasting established versus transitional experiences. It's very interesting. Yeah, looking at the clock, we don't have very much time for debate, but yeah, if there are one or two questions from the audience, this is the time. Is there anybody perhaps that's... Yes, please, sir.
Thank you, sir. In the beginning, I would like to start by thanking the ALF and all the speakers for the information that they shown us today. So I'm just not going to ask questions, but I'm just going to do some remarks. Because I worked in electoral field in Tunisia, I worked in traineeship, I worked with liberal parties. And why Tunisia is the only exception in the Arab world? Because we don't have jihadists like Syrians. We don't have army like Egypt. But we have a bigger problem, which is arrogance. And believe me, sir, we have a big problem, which is arrogance. I worked with quite, let's say, 5 parties in Tunisia, and those 5 parties, before election, when I worked with them, every party told me, okay, I want to implement a strategy to observe election because I'm willing to have 40 seats in the parliament. Every party, okay, sir, you can't have it. It's impossible. And another thing, I was talking with Mr. Vice President of the European Parliament, and I remember the case when I was working with the Electoral Commission in Tunisia about the 2 experts they were stuck in Vienna, and it wasn't the only problem there, because I remember a lot, quite sometimes I hear in Tunisia, we done the revolution, we spread the revolution in Arab words, we are not going to let somebody show us how to do things. This is the problem in Tunisia. We don't know stuff, and we tell everybody that we know how to do it rightly. And I would like to say that European Union and other organizations have done a lot for us, but it's time to change the mentality in Tunisia. And thank you.
Thank you much for the last question. Are there any other questions? We'll collect a few minutes before. Yes, please.
Thank you. I have a question which is a little bit more practical. How democracy can help against the Islamic State? Because we are talking about the promoting democracy in Syria, and the European Union was often accused by Syrians for intervening too much into the democratic processes. But they are trying to deliver a kind of understanding of democracy that is popular in the European Union, but that doesn't respond and correspond to the Syrian understanding of democracy. And okay, in the Syrian constitution they have already allowed the political parties in 2012, but there are still no political parties that were participating in the elections, and also during the presidential elections in June that happened actually, despite of all the protests from the Western world. But yeah, maybe then democracy is not the proper tool. Maybe we should just educate people there more. And where do you put the center of the gravity here? Because also the multiple political parties are possible only in transition, but transition is not possible without peace. So in Syria, what do you think we have to concentrate on? Educating people, on establishing peace, or on supporting democracy? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. There's another clear question. Perhaps one more before we... Yes, please, sir.
After the question is to Ahmed Abdullah, after the overthrow of Morsi, there was strong opposition to the Muslim Brotherhood and strong support for Sisi. Do you think this has affected public support and the public perception of civil society initiatives, as that was a tool that was often used by the Muslim Brotherhood?
Okay, thank you very much. I heard a lot of remarks actually, and very good questions already. Perhaps we start again alphabetically, or anybody that feels that.
I'll start by your question. Yes, at the 30th of June, there was strong hatred of the Brotherhood in the community. But and at that time, the ousting of Morsi was a demand for a lot of people. But let me say this: yes, any coup starts when the people demands it. Okay, but how it ends after this? What we have seen is that they ousted Morsi, but they didn't make early presidential elections at that time. First, they smashed out the Brotherhood, killed them, burned them in the streets, and then they came to liberal and secular activists and jailed them, and then they threatened the civil society people, and they not even threatened to kill, they killed someone. Yesterday, one of my friends in the April 6 movement in Nahia, in the place where the first march of the January 25th protest started by the April 6 movement, he was killed yesterday in front of his house. Okay, let me tell you this. After finishing the Islamists and the secular activists, they made the presidential elections. And guess what? They took 2 days to ask people to go to vote, and they extended it for the third day because no one went to the electoral poll stations. Yes, maybe the coup was good for the people because they ousted the president, but now no one supports this. Now they see that everything is being more expensive. There is no actual freedom inside the country. People are detained from the universities. They have been detained from their work. And more than 40,000 in a place like Egypt. You see every village or every family, they have someone who is detained right now. So it is not gaining that popular support. And if so, he would have made the parliamentary elections. But right now, any coup has a head, but he doesn't still have a body because the military can't enter the parliamentary elections. So it's getting in now about a year just, to put things in order so that he can put the people of the former regime now once again in the parliament. And by that time, he needs to have a crackdown on the civil society. So no independent ones should monitor the election, say what is happening. And this has been, obvious because they even rejected the association of the April 6 movement to monitor the presidential election, say it's good. Now Carter Center is out of Egypt, so let me tell you, it's not that popular anyway. And second point about radicalization. In Egypt, of course he knows more about Syria, but in Egypt, let me tell you that the dictatorship and the authoritarian regime, they are a terrorist-making machine. When they are closing all the public space in front of people, when all liberal and secular activists are now thrown in jail, then you are, killing the hope of the people to a peaceful change. And this is very dangerous, and we don't like this. But seeing people like Maher, like Adil, and Duma, like Arad Fatah, like Sarasi is now in prison, it's very dangerous for society. So what we urge the elite to do is to push more and more and more in democracy, because democracy is the only thing that can prevent radicalization of youth. It means wider participation of people to decide the future and decide those who govern them.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr.
Well, I must say I'm very alarmed. I must say I'm very alarmed by what you're saying. Because if you ask everybody around the street in Europe, they are all probably under the impression that the Sisi regime is just an intermediate regime that has managed to put a little halt to the extremes of the Islamists. This is the prevailing situation in Europe. And what you say is very important. We must come to realize, even I was a little bit reserved about the Sisi regime without the proper information. And so this is one basic point. I'd like to answer your question about Syria. I think there are 3 or 4 things I will very rapidly mention we should do. When discussing about civil society and all that sort of thing, without pacifying Syria is, it's like talking about going to the opera without having bread. And so I think there are 6 steps we must undertake. First of all, and that is a general observation, I don't think it's a good idea, and I said that to Cairo, to start by trying to import liberal principles as they are in the West into the Arab world. Even the word liberalism, I was told, there is no translation, it comes from Europe. I think we should help the Arab world to discover the brightest side of their tradition. What has happened in the Arab world is what has happened in Europe 5 or 6 years ago, 8 centuries ago, when in the Western part, not in the Orthodox world, they had the Inquisition and all that sort of thing which marred Christianity. And you are in a similar phase. So there is a need to rediscover the brighter side of Islamic culture. Not just reject Islamism, but give it a different light. The second is in our relations, as we develop the Mediterranean Union and in our relations of the EU with the Arab world, we must introduce, for the respect of the second principle I mentioned, the constitutional guarantees and practical guarantees of civil rights. The third, you need an alliance of states in your region that will be able to deal with regional crises, because Western countries are seen with suspicion when intervening. Look what happened to the United States. It has lost all credibility. So if Christian armies land there to follow a mission, they are seen with something. There is a point a journalist in the Daily Telegraph made. Muslims forget that Christianity is not an import into the Middle East, it's an export from the Middle East. So perhaps you should come to realize it. The fourth is we must find ways to stop 2 things. The sources of funds which go to the Islamic State and the sources of human recruitment. If we don't stop these 2, which you very wisely mentioned, will do nothing. We have to completely cut off these 2 channels, the funding and human recruitment. And finally, we need a wide-scale mechanism under the UN supervision and under EU supervision for human development of the destroyed areas and for the reconstruction of these areas. So these are, I think, the guidelines for bringing about some exit from the Syrian crisis.
Okay, thank you very much.
About the Islamic State, I would like to remember that it didn't appear in 2014. It appeared as soon as the beginnings of 2013 in Syria. It was called Daesh at that time by the Syrian pro-democracy activists themselves, and now there's a big debate on how we should call them. Should we call them Islamic State, Daesh, or whatever? But this discussion was in the Syrian social media as early as the summer 2013, and we collaboratively decided to call them Daesh, which was a shock for them. And they were killing people just because they were calling them Daesh. Their first enemy, Daesh is just the acronym of Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, in Arabic, but it sounds weird and ugly. What I would like to say is that the first one who opposed the Islamic State are these pro-democracy media who were sponsoring. The first article against Daesh appeared inside Syria, and they were distributed inside Syria as early as June 2013. Between September and November, there was a decision to be made by the Free Syrian Army to become an ally of the Islamists or to fight the Islamists. And I think because of the pressure of the activists, the civil society activists, they decided to fight Daesh and to ask them out of Idlib, for example. They could not do that in Raqqa, where they were too strong there. But they were ousted from many territories in Hama, in Idlib, in Aleppo, by the Free Syrian armies, who received these magazines we were printing inside Syria and distributing inside Syria. I think that's their worst enemy. Freedom of expression is the worst enemy of Daesh, before bombs, before airstrikes that don't really affect them. It's to the opposite them, I think. I think the best way to fight the Islamic State is by opposing the free minds inside Syria to them. If you allow children to make fun of them, that's their worst enemy. If you allow someone to write something on a wall against them, that's their terror to them. They think they are terrorizing people, and knowing that some people are not scared from them is the best way to fight them, I think.
Thank you very much. Again, satire and the response of children as well. Perhaps you also want to...
I don't think I have much to add, but I really appreciated your question. I think our experience in Egypt was quite, well, I would say, difficult, controversial, paradoxical. We have seen the Muslim Brotherhood and even more Salafist parties jointly in a popular election get about more than 75% of the vote. They have then enormously quickly lost the support of their society by their behavior. They for a very long time clung to this argument of, but you've given us a mandate, and we're going to sit out our mandate, but the response from society to a large extent was, but you've misbehaved so much that no, the people are rising up and you're not going to finish your mandate. In the end, that materialized in a coup, which is again, of course, not the situation that you would want it to go if there was an actual popular uprising, and that then resulted in this party being forbidden, chased, captured, murdered, executed, which, of course, in the essence of your political freedoms, is one of the gravest things you can do if you support liberalism. In that sense, I think it's very just that Mr. Abdallah points out the impopularity of the presidential elections and the timing when they were held to really not consider them any sincere and genuine and legitimate elections in the first place. For NIMD, that would normally mean that we have to stop working there, because we only work in countries where we can work with all parties, because that is our principle. And so what we are doing right now is to kind of more on an implicit level try to still have people who can no longer, of course, say that they are supporters of the Brotherhood, still participate in all kinds of multi-stakeholder, multi-party, multi-government dialogue settings. And that for us is now a pilot, so to speak. It's a test case, because if it turns out that that is not possible, then it is also for NIB quite clear that the development of democracy in that country is just not going there, that we, with our very niche expertise, can have a role there. But it's also surprising, and I want to refer back to the remark that our colleague from Syria made. You also need to really know, when you say support the unsupported, and you mean civil society, which civil society are you talking about? Because I think we know from everywhere around the world, there are countries where the state pretty much creates its own civil society. Now, if you want to go and support that, that is an effort of futility for your efforts towards democratization. And even there, we had experiences where our local partners in Egypt, who wrote a proposal which they would implement after the ousting of Morsi, had in their new annual plan an introduction which was so gravely anti-democratic with regards to how they spoke about the Muslim Brotherhood, that we really had to say, that's interesting to know. And of course we had to decide whether or not to terminate our collaboration with them. So let's not make the mistake of considering civil society neutral and pro-democracy per se. They come in many varieties. And the other element is, of course, that also due to our efforts, there are a lot of civil society organizations who actually at a certain point stop being civil society organizations and actually become NGOs. They're just to implement our projects. And there we have a responsibility to do proper identification of your local partners, but also how you treat them with regards to funding. And that doesn't mean not too little, but surely also not too much, because that creates all kinds of dynamics. I would say from an IMD's perspective, your question about Islamic State is so much further from the work we do, and I think my colleagues have answered on that. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. All speakers, it's very interesting. Unfortunately, time is limited here. Perhaps you could have a small, short closing remark, if you could bundle it in 1 or 2 sentences, maybe. I know it's very difficult, it's a difficult project, but then, yeah, we start again with
In the conclusion, I would like to thank all the people who participate. Nothing more to mention other than adding to what my colleague said. It's not just the Brotherhood who got banned. The April 6 Youth Movement is banned by court in Egypt. So actually there is no liberal or actually democratic institution is now immune against the government. And then but still I still have hope. We have wonderful youth who participated in the revolution and who stick to the values of human rights, defending human rights and democracy. And this is the hope of our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
I don't think I have anything more to add. It was quite clear. I talked a little bit more than I wanted.
Yeah, then Mr. Sakis.
Just a few words, I think, about Syria. There are seeds of democracy inside Syria. These are this civil society organization, and they need water to grow, and they need a lot of water because there are also seeds of dark ages made by the Islamists, and they are pouring much more water than the pro-democracy people are pouring on the seeds of democracy.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'll just quote the slogan that we use in our work a lot to emphasize again this dialogue, but also this effort of the awareness that you'll have to engage and make some dirty hands sometimes, or work with people with dirty hands to advance. That is a quote from Nelson Mandela. If you want to make peace with your partner, if you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Then he becomes your partner. And that is kind of the slogan. You can rebel, you can advocate, you can be an activist, but at a certain point you're going to have to sit at that table with that person or that organization or that group that you hate and despise most. And I think that's the difference between the activist level and then moving it to the political level where I am. Food for thought, I would say, before we go to actual food.
Okay, thank you very much. And indeed, the actual food is already served. It's waiting for you outside. I also have another suggestion for those that are not too hungry yet. There's at the moment, organized by the European Partnership for Democracy here at the European Parliament as well, a conference which will examine what the EU means to neighboring countries in terms of democratic development, and we'll look at 2 concrete examples of countries currently in transition, namely Ukraine and Tunisia. And then last but not least, I've also got some food for the members of the panel here, some Belgian chocolates to thank you. And I thank everybody here for coming, of course, showing up.